And so we continue to meander with water, across borders, scales, geographies, histories, and the stories that connect us in ways we could never have imagined had we not embarked on this winding journey. A journey where tides ebb and flow, where water rushes through, not erasing all traces but carrying them far beyond what we can see. This week, I find grief accompanies me as I meander. I believe grief is always present in this necropolitical world, though at times other sensations, sentiments, or emotions may take precedence. Water draws me to reflect on the interconnectedness of life and death. I think of a world so convinced of its own dominion that it renders rivers and oceans inanimate, entities to be reshaped, reconfigured, or plundered at will. In 2016, the Prime Minister of India, Modi, said that blood and water cannot flow together. But I have never seen blood seek separation from her kin. I have only seen her willfully disperse, a dance missed in the blink of an eye if you aren't paying attention. Beware of power and the imaginaries it projects. Our demise and deaths feed it with opportunities to seize more and more and more. Blood and water most certainly mix and flow together. Water throughout this text is not just a setting, but a collaborator. It is an archive, a conduit, a witness to violence and transformation. To think with water is to recognize how imperialism, extractivism, and necropolitics have flowed through its currents, but also how memory, kinship, and resistance survive there too. Hydrofeminist thought urges us to attune to these layers, to listen differently, to feel the weight of what moves beneath the surface, and to notice the connections between distant geographies and seemingly separate events. In attending to the ocean floors, torn by trawlers, the clay tips of Cornwall seeded with migrant flora, and the rivers flowing through politically charged towns, this work listens to what water remembers. In this sense, hydrofeminist thinking flows through the work as an undercurrent, supporting a journey that suggests we are being with rather than looking at. A journey that acknowledges how grief, ecology, politics, and history are always already entangled, mixed, like blood and water. I went to see Ocean by David Attenborough, his final offering to the world at 99 years old. Quite early in the film, he described the ocean as the last frontier, a place of wondrous discoveries. I cringed. I cringed at the language of European colonial and imperial expansion being applied once again, this time to the ocean. No matter the context, such vocabulary carries violent legacies deeply embedded within it. The language of opportunity has embedded within it so much death. I watched in horror as cameras captured the seabed torn apart by bottom trawlers, crushing entire ecosystems into oblivion in mere moments. Giant nets emerging from the depths, 3/4 of their catch, then discarded, lifeless, back into the sea. The scale of destruction shook me. A growing sense of doom took hold of me as I witnessed, reminding me again that death economies are what drive our world. Gaza is crushed into oblivion because the death world deems its people expendable, collateral in the pursuit of gas and geostrategic control. Marine ecologies too are sacrificed because, in this death world, their extinction is seen as necessary for profit. Many may say that deep-sea trawling is just a job, an occupation like any other, but that only raises deeper questions. What kind of worldview makes necropolitical realities so implicit that we accept them without question, so naturalized that they feel inevitable. After all, we conquered the sea, didn't we? With those vast naval forces and companies that enacted imperial conquest. European empires spread their supremacy across the globe through the lens of opportunity, discovery, and salvation, not merely in search of resources, but to control access to them. We are all enmeshed within these death world economies. And now we are here, exploiting, capitalizing, extracting with a singular vision of progress and success. In the process, we demonize sharks who snap us up as welcome meals when they wander closer to shore, disoriented and hungry as their homes are disturbed and fish populations dwindle in the sea and biodiversity is crushed for many, many, many dollars. I think of the wolf, hunted into extinction in the UK, a demonized creature impacted by deforestation that supported the growing settlements, leaving them with a dwindling habitat as the ecosystem that they were part of was destroyed. So they hunted livestock and, according to Scottish law, even disturbed human graves. I begin to wonder, how much did shipbuilding contribute to the demise of the wolves? If it did at all. At this point, I am simply roaming through the supply chains we treat as distant and disconnected, yet they have always been embedded within intricate ecosystems. But we refuse to see them as such. We see evil trespass against the holders of power as isolated events, divorced from the nexus of stories, histories, and realities in which they are deeply enmeshed. After all, the slave revolt is simply the mad, violent, vicious behavior of inherent evil. I haven't meandered along the Trent as much as I would have liked this week. No new foraged herbs have been added to my drying racks, though I continue to learn more about what grows along its banks. Still, my thoughts have drifted towards the canals and their deep connections to industry, wondering what stories of local and global, of intimate and imperial might still be traced in the waters of Burton-on-Trent. Of course, the theme of hydropolitics and the presence of a large Pakistani community here and the current geopolitical issues in the region has catapulted me into learning more about the Indus Valley region between Pakistan and India. Now, as we see the Indus Water Treaty being contested, two nations argue and exchange fire across borders drawn by the British, parting gifts of colonial rule's violent legacies. Did you know Pakistan holds the world's most extensive single canal system? The Indus Basin irrigation system, first constructed under British colonial rule, was designed to transform arid, flood-prone land into agricultural zones for profitable cash crops, such as cotton, wheat, and rice. I find echoes of this strategy in Guyana's canal system. Swamplands drained to facilitate the brutal efficiency of sugarcane plantations worked by enslaved people with a life expectancy of 40 years. I think of the indentured labourers sent from India to Guyana after the abolition of slavery. Could some of them have come from the Indus Valley region? How many points of interconnection lie hidden in plain sight, flowing through our waters, our blood, the air unseen, waiting to be uncovered, to resist the abstraction and fragmentation that fuel the death world? After independence, the Indus Basin irrigation system was expanded. One development, the Mangala Dam, forged a direct link between the Indus Valley and towns across the UK, Burton-on-Trent among them. Built by a consortium of 8 American companies and a British engineer, Geoffrey Binney, the project relied on thousands of Pakistani workers, engineers, officials and technicians, and displaced over 100,000 people from the Mirpur region, their valley soon to be underwater. For some reason, the Institute of Civil Engineers, only mentioned the American companies and the British engineer in naming those who had been responsible for constructing this dam. I listened to the account of a woman who still mourns the loss of her home. She recalled the sudden shift in life, people who couldn't swim forced to navigate rising waters by boat, the increase in drownings as families traveled to and from weddings. The moment of leaving came when the water stood just 10 meters from her door. Some displaced communities resettled elsewhere in Pakistan, while others, many thousands, migrated to the UK. Today, nearly 70% of the UK's Pakistani population traces its roots to Mirpur. Can you see how interwoven our stories are? There is another journey that we will now embark upon, one that will take us across the world and back again to a coastal city here in the UK, before winding down the Trent and Mersey Canal to Burton-upon-Trent, Liverpool. But we must also add St. Austell in Cornwall to that list, as often on the way back home, ships would stop off on the Cornish coast. I first heard about this history in 2021, when interviewing the Cornish artist Robin Sullivan about their project, and everything and nothing has changed. I can't remember if this particular story made it into the final cut of the podcast we produced, but it is well worth listening to, and it is linked in the reference section below. One statement from Robin has always stayed with me. Looking over a 6,000-year history of evolving communities and culture was a way of looking into the future and understanding what this landscape is going to continue to look like. End quote. Although I haven't been thinking about this statement explicitly of late, I remember something shifting in my mind when I first heard it. As part of my role at the time, I was able to visit Robin on site, camping beneath one of the magnificent white mountains of waste clay known as the Great Trevithick Tip, or the Sky Tip, in St. Austell, part of what some call the Cornish Alps. These towering formations, born from the waste deposits of China clay mining industry, have come to define the region's landscape. To the unfamiliar eye, they seem natural. Flora and fauna have long since claimed these skyward territories, save for the startling brilliance of their white surfaces. The landscape is a story, if only we know how to listen. Robin spoke of vast informal migrations of flora and fauna from across the world, some arriving from the Americas in the soil used as ship ballast. Before docking in Liverpool, many of these ships would stop in Cornwall, sometimes to dump ballast, sometimes for smuggling, sometimes for trade. Some of the plants now thriving on those sky tips are almost certainly migrant species carried across oceans. Embedded in the very soil are stories of travel, empire, domination, and enslavement. Many of these ships would have sailed from Liverpool, stopping in West Africa to collect their human cargo before heading to the Americas. Bodies, dead, dying, discarded, were thrown into the sea to make room, to protect the cargo, to ensure the voyage. These were the voyages that underpinned the plantation, the wealth they generated, building the grand displays we still see today in the UK, lavish stately homes like those depicted in Bridgerton or in Jane Austen's England, with their perfectly manicured grounds and pastoral facades of civility. And on their return voyage, the first glimpse of England was Cornwall. So how does a town in Staffordshire, Burton-upon-Trent, now surrounded by villages and towns that lie in the hands of the Reform Party, through which the River Trent flows, connect into this story? But first, before we answer this question, let's make a slight sidestep. Burton-on-Trent borders Derbyshire, where the Reform Party offered no meaningful local policies, only grand declarations on matters entirely outside the remit of local councils. Just saying, the stories of abstraction that dominate the death world are not built in clarity of thinking, education, or deep reflection. They are fueled by sensationalism and the siloing of people into increasingly narrow, indefensible identities, leaving them unable to recognize their many interconnections with the world around them and beyond them. Burton-on-Trent lies along the Trent and Mersey Canal. Sugar was a key ingredient in the fermentation process that gave rise to the famous Burton IPA. After the Sugar Duties Act of 1846, sugar became a regular feature in brewing. It was transported via canal networks like this one. Thence, heavy goods such as sugar or coal moved more efficiently by water before the dominance of rail in the late 19th century. Prior to this act, including sugar in the commercial production of beer incurred heavy taxation. There is still much for me to understand about the process of brewing beer, so bear with me and stick with me on this journey as I learn and share more. The sugar that was used connected town, city, and empire, threading stories together of histories of freedom, enslavement, labor, and profit. The act may have come in post-abolition, but the connections to enslavement are inescapable. Indentured laborers from India, shipped to replace the enslaved, were still whipped in the fields. Bound by contracts that offered little freedom, unfolded into deeply entrenched hierarchies rooted in the British imperial project. Those same hierarchies, economic and racial, remain with us. They echo through time into the tense relations between India and Pakistan, the orchestrated ethnic tensions in Rwanda, and the socio-racial legacies of Guyana and the wider Caribbean. These are not past issues. They are structural echoes that shape how British society votes, speaks, and understands itself today. Too many are driven to vote not for policies that will sustain them in the face of climate collapse or corporate domination, but for ideologies built on colonial imaginaries, racial anxieties, and a refusal to see the entangled, globalized, and ecological nature of our survival. To move forward, we must learn to trace the submerged. Those stories buried beneath the empire's sediment, flowing quietly through our canals, rivers, and bloodlines. Water reminds us that nothing is truly separate, not continents, not histories, not lives. Grief, when held in communion with memory, can become a form of resistance, one that does not seek to purify or simplify, but to honor complexity, entanglement, and care. David Attenborough, in his final offering, spoke not just of loss, but of hope. That if we protect just over 30% of the ocean, it has the extraordinary capacity to regenerate and recover, faster than we ever imagined. This is not a metaphor, but a call. There are many out there already visioning, building, and overgrowing. Go and find them. But remember, in all this doing, we must also make time to listen to what the earth remembers, to what water remembers, to the deep, sedimented stories of our entangled lives. Listen to the stories and histories and patterns that can tell us so much about the past, the present, and the future. Building while excavating is a fine balance to manage. The real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. Marcel Proust.